The night of May 1st, 2010, was swallowed by a thick, oppressive mist that clung to the reeds of Oak Beach. In the early hours of that morning, a frantic voice pierced the silence of the dispatch center. It belonged to Shannon Gilbert, a young woman who was running for her life through a gated community. Her 23-minute 911 call was a symphony of pure terror. She pleaded with operators, claiming that someone was after her, her voice trembling with a primal fear that transcended the static of the phone line. Before the call ended, Shannon vanished into the salt marshes, leaving behind a mystery that would haunt the shores of Long Island for over a decade. The search for Shannon began as a localized effort to find a missing person, but the desolate terrain held far darker secrets than anyone could have anticipated. 7 months later, an officer and his cadaver dog were scouring the brush along Ocean Parkway, a lonely stretch of asphalt that separates the Great South Bay from the Atlantic Ocean. Instead of finding Shannon, the dog alerted to a discovery that chilled the nation to its core. Hidden in the thick undergrowth, wrapped carefully in camouflaged burlap, were the skeletal remains of a woman. But the horror did not stop there. Within days, 3 more bodies were found in a similar state, spaced out at regular intervals like a gruesome row of markers. These women, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, became known to the world as the Gilgo Four. Suddenly, the quiet suburban life of Long Island was shattered. The realization dawned that a serial killer had been using the remote, the windswept dunes of Ocean Parkway, as a personal graveyard for years. A sense of profound unease settled over the community. Families who used to enjoy the scenic drive along the coast now looked at the dense brambles with suspicion and dread. The killer was not just a ghost. He was a meticulous predator who knew these marshes intimately, someone who could operate in the shadows of the night without leaving a trace. He was a monster who walked among them, watching the news as the mystery of his work unfolded on television screens across the state. Before they were headlines, these women were daughters, sisters, and mothers with dreams of their own. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, who disappeared in 2007, was a small-town girl from Connecticut trying to provide for her children. Melissa Barthelemy was a sharp-witted young woman who dreamed of owning her own salon. Megan Waterman was a devoted mother who loved the holidays, and Amber Lynn Costello was known for her kindness and the beautiful way she sang. Their lives were cut short by a predator who preyed on their vulnerability, seeing them not as people, but as targets. The tragedy of their deaths was compounded by the stigma surrounding their lives, as the media and early investigation often focused on their work rather than their humanity. As the months turned into years, the investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders began to stall. What should have been a high-priority manhunt became bogged down by internal politics and high-level corruption within local law enforcement. Police Chief James Burke, who oversaw the department at the time, would later be imprisoned for unrelated crimes, but his tenure left a stain on the case. Leads were ignored, and communication between agencies fractured. The case grew cold, and the families of the victims were left in a limbo of grief and unanswered questions. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This case remained a dark stain on the history of the island, a puzzle with missing pieces that no one seemed able to find. Despite the lack of progress, a few shadowy details remained etched in the old case files. Witnesses near Amber Lynn Costello's home had described seeing a giant of a man, a hulking figure who stood over 6 feet tall with a thick, intimidating build. There was also mention of a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, a distinct vehicle that had been seen in the vicinity of the disappearances. These fragments of evidence sat in boxes for over 10 years, gathering dust while the killer continued to live his life in the light of day. The monster remained unmasked, a silent predator hiding in plain sight, until 2022, when a new task force decided to take a second desperate look at the evidence that had been overlooked for far too long. The hunt was finally beginning anew, and the shadows were about to be pushed back. In early 2022, the stagnant air surrounding the Gilgo Beach investigation finally began to stir. A new district attorney, Ray Tierney, realized that solving a decade-old mystery required breaking the walls of institutional inertia. He formed the Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force, a collaborative engine of state, local, and federal investigators. This wasn't just another committee, it was a collective of fresh eyes who refused to be burdened by past failures. They returned to the discarded fragments of the old files, applying modern forensic technology to digital data that had once been too complex to decipher. The breakthrough started with the invisible threads of the digital age. Investigators meticulously mapped the movements of burner phones used to contact the victims before their disappearances. By cross-referencing cell tower pings from over a decade prior with billing records and credit card transactions, a chilling pattern emerged. The signals converged in two specific hubs, the suburban neighborhood of Massapequa Park and the streets of Midtown Manhattan. This was no coincidence. Somewhere in the overlap of these locations lived a predator who had successfully navigated the world under the radar. As the data points narrowed, a name surfaced: Rex Heuermann. To his neighbors, he was a fixture of the community, a tall, imposing man who took the train every morning to his architectural firm. He lived in a small, somewhat dilapidated house that looked out of place among the manicured lawns. He was a professional consultant known for navigating the complex labyrinth of building codes. He was a husband and a father, embodying the predictable rhythm of a middle-class life. But as the task force dug deeper, they realized he matched the physical description of the giant seen years earlier near Amber Lynn Costello's home. The task force did not rush. They began a sophisticated surveillance operation that turned the city of New York into a high-stakes hunting ground. Undercover officers trailed the 6'4" architect through crowded sidewalks, watching him buy coffee and attend meetings. They were looking for a single discarded item that could bridge the gap between a digital profile and biological reality. The tension was palpable. Every time Rex stepped into a subway station, investigators were there, lingering in the background, waiting for the one piece of evidence that would change everything. The turning point arrived on a cold January afternoon in 2023. Investigators watched as Rex Heuermann finished a meal and tossed a discarded pizza box into a trash can on a Manhattan street. For the task force, this mundane act was the moment they had been praying for. Forensic teams moved in quickly, securing the box and the leftover crust inside. In the sterile environment of a lab, analysts compared the DNA from the crust to a hair found on the burlap used to wrap the victims years ago. The match was undeniable. The genetic link definitively pointed to Rex. While the world saw a successful architect, Rex's digital footprint revealed a landscape of depravity. Behind the firewall of his computer, he had spent years conducting sadistic searches. He was not just looking at the news about the murders. He was obsessively tracking the families of his victims, searching for images of their grief. He lived a life of extreme compartmentalization, moving between the world of blueprints and a secret basement vault where he kept a massive arsenal of weapons. His existence was a masterclass in deception, a mask of normalcy that hid a predatory hunger. For 13 years, the families had looked for a monster in the shadows. They never suspected that the killer was a neighbor, a man who paid his taxes and caught the same morning train as everyone else. Rex Heuermann had not been hiding in a cave. He had been living in plain sight, a wolf among the sheep. But as the evidence mounted, the walls of his life began to crumble, leading the task force to a conclusion as terrifying as it was truly inevitable. In the sweltering heat of July 2023, the invisible net that the task force had woven finally tightened. Rex Heuermann was walking down a busy Manhattan sidewalk, just another face in the crowd, when investigators moved in with absolute clinical precision. There were no sirens. It was a swift surgical strike. As the hulking architect was led away in handcuffs, the facade he had maintained for decades shattered. The world watched in silence as the man who designed buildings was revealed as the suspect in the state's most haunting mystery. The dramatic arrest sent a massive shockwave through the island, signaling the definitive end of a 13-year game of cat and mouse that had left a trail of broken lives and haunting unanswered questions. While Rex sat in a holding cell, forensic teams descended upon his home in Massapequa Park. What looked like a cluttered, neglected suburban house on the corner held secrets that defied comprehension. For 12 grueling days, investigators meticulously combed the property, uncovering what became known as a house of horrors. They discovered a massive arsenal of over 200 firearms tucked away in a soundproof and fortified basement vault, a reinforced room that was a monument to a dark, hidden life. The contrast was unsettling. While neighbors mowed their lawns, Rex lived atop a fortress of weaponry and darkness. Crime scene investigators hauled out countless boxes of evidence, searching for trophies and connections to the lives cut short. The mundane clutter of his family home had served as a perfect mask for a sinister secondary purpose. The forensic mountain grew as investigators linked physical evidence to the victims. DNA testing revealed a hauntingly chilling detail. Hairs found on the burlap used to wrap the bodies matched Rex's wife. Rex had likely used his home as a dark staging ground, he unknowingly carrying trace evidence from his family life into his dark activities while his wife was out of town. Analysis of his digital life revealed a terrifying pattern of obsession. Rex hadn't just committed the acts, he had haunted the victims' memories. He used burner phones to conduct hundreds of searches for the relatives of the women he was accused of murdering, tracking their photos and their ongoing grief. This digital voyeurism showed a predator who found pleasure in the ripples of his heinous crimes, refusing to let the families find peace. For the families of the Gilgo Four, the arrest brought a moment of profound, agonizing relief. They finally had a human face to attach to the monster that had stolen their beloved daughters. Seeing the imposing figure of Rex Heuermann in a courtroom finally brought a profound sense of justice many feared would never come. However, the scope of the investigation did not stop there. Authorities began looking at dozens of cold cases along the coast, suspecting the architect's shadow stretched much further. He was soon linked to the death of Sandra Costilla, and the list of potential victims expanded across state lines. Rex Heuermann was no longer just a local suspect. He was emerging as one of the most prolific and methodical serial killers in American history. The long-awaited resolution brought closure to the community, yet the psychological scars remained. The harrowing case served as a stark reminder of the banality of evil. The reality that a predator can wear a professional suit and return home every night without raising red flags. Rex Heuermann was not a ghost. He was a neighbor, a colleague, and a father. While justice slowly moved forward, the public was left to reckon with the knowledge that such darkness could thrive in the unsuspecting light of day. The road to retribution and justice for the victims of Ocean Parkway had reached its end, but the memory of the women who were lost would serve as a testament to the resilience of those who never stopped searching. In the end, the giant was brought down by the relentless pursuit of those who refused to let the forgotten victims stay buried in the sand.